Okay, I promised you a video to try to tell you where all this stuff came from in this chassis that I'm building for this 1-ton truck. So here we go. That air tank right there came out of a mid-70s small Kenworth cab over. I don't remember the model number. They called them a Hustler, among other things. They were sort of short, low cab, forward cab overs that were built in Canada and Mexico, I believe. These coil-over shocks, I got into a shock absorber website and found some that would replace the original Dodge shocks. These things were spec'd for a Chevrolet 1-ton on the back. Now this here anti-sway bar, I needed a pretty herky one, and I couldn't find anything tough enough, big enough at any of these off-road places or anything like that. So I stripped this one out of a little Isuzu cab-over truck up at a wrecking yard in Snohomish. And those connecting links are basically out of a Dodge 4x4, mid-1990s, and they were lengthened with a section of Cummins push tube, injector push tube, which I had a number of laying around. Now these cross members, there's 3 of them that I had built. They were set up and built by Allied Metal Fabricators in Redmond, Washington, and then I drilled all the holes in the brackets and the cross members and mounted them all up. These fenders, I had them custom rolled, and I built a spider down here that goes onto the back of the steering knuckle in the backing plate. And then these brackets and that spider were all made on a CNC mill. So I ended up using cycle fenders because I couldn't figure out any way to make brackets to go to the frame that would look halfway decent. Now the grill and the radiator came out of I can't remember the year the guy told me, 1950 or so, Federal. And the radiator, I had it recored and shortened 4 inches so it would fit in there. Now this idler in the steering gear was necessary in order to get me to turn these wheels sharp enough to go around a corner real tight or in and out of a parking space. Because if I'd have just run the tie rod, the drag link from the pitman arm to the steering arm, when I turned to the left, that thing would be right in here and I couldn't turn any sharper than about that. So that's why that idler is in there, and that was made by Allied Metal Fabricators, and then I turned a bushing for it on my lathe over there. The engine came out of a crane. I don't know what kind of a crane, but I bought it at a place called Seattle Tractor, and they just, I don't know about the tractor part, they just scrap cranes. But it was a 290, a supercharged 290, and I had the control parts list changed with the injectors and the pump to a 320 horsepower. Now, you look at that shallow oil pan down there, that's a strange one, because most Cummins oil pans have a big deep sump about a foot below the crankcase, and there was no way I could put something like that in here. So what happened was I was just about ready to take the pan to a aluminum welding outfit and have them section some of it out and then maybe even dry sump the thing in order to make it work. But I found that on a road grader at County Line Equipment down in just south of Federal Way in Fife. And they were scrapping that grader, and I says, I'll take that oil pan. How much? They said $100. I grabbed it. This flywheel housing is a number 2 SAE. It's the only thing that would fit in here. A number 1, which is far more common, wouldn't fit between the frame rails with mounts. The number 2 is a couple inches narrower, which also means the flywheel is smaller, and it also means the bell housing has to be smaller. Now here we got into some stuff that took some time. This T905A, which is set up as an overdrive box, a TO, basically was pretty rare. Some trucks were built with them, but this was about the time everybody was going to 13 speeds and stuff. So very few trucks were built with like two transmissions anymore, a main and an auxiliary. So these things showed up mostly in buses, and not very many of them, because they were all going to automatics back then. So the real toothache was finding a bell housing that would mount to this rear transmission up to a number 2 SAE bell housing. And I finally found one in Florida at some gear outfit, and they wanted $500 for it, and I had to pay through the nose. But I did. The steering gear came out of a late 40s, early 1950s Kenworth fire truck. I stripped it out of there myself, but I never found out what year it was. It's a Gimmer steering box. And I tore it apart and put it back together, and I didn't have to take a single shim out because it had so little wear on it from being in a fire truck that never went anywhere very often. Now this drag link was sourced at one of these off-highway outfits that make great big heavy-duty steering gear for, you know, trucks with lift kits in them and stuff. So I married that up past the idler arm with the secondary drag link, which is from a Ford F-750. I found a couple of them on eBay, grabbed them both, sawed one off to make this end, and kept the other one intact to make that. These rubber bumpers on the top of the springs, believe it or not, are brand new Toyota Tundra parts that I got on eBay. Make that. These pedals, the cross shaft, believe it or not, came out of a Model A Ford. And you can see the ovals on the back where I welded the diamond plate on the front. I never did like the shape of those Model A pedals anyway. This park and brake, I found it on a transmission at a metal recycling place up in Snohomish. Not quite sure what it came out of, but I bought the whole transmission for $5 just to get that park and brake lever. And I think it was probably a post-war GMC. It kind of looks like what I used to see in GMC buses when I was a kid. Now this equalizer here for the parking brake came out of a 1950 International 3/4 ton pickup. It just happened to be exactly what I needed, and I happened to own the International at that time, and I had a driveline brake on it with a 5-speed in it. So I just took that equalizer out and put it right in here. I had to have these cables for the brakes custom built because the guy that took this axle out had just torched them off right at the backing plate. This is a Dana 70 with a track lock in it. It's a 3.07 ratio. I had to get the longest legged ratios I could because this is a 2100 RPM engine. So this transmission's got a 0.65 overdrive in it, and with a 307 rear end, and these great big tall 19.5 tires, this thing is supposed to go 100 miles an hour at about 2100 RPM, which it's governed at, or just above. These steps and the battery box were fabricated. Actually, they were broke or bent or whatever you called, and then fabricated, and I welded them up and put the expanded metal on there for traction. But that was done by Allied Fabricators. Same as this cross member here. The cross member was bare. I built the rear cab mount for it, put it on there. Everything back here is pretty much Dodge 1966. That was the chassis I started out with. I drilled all the rivets out, got rid of all the cross members, and started from scratch, making mounts, making cross members, and everything else. And because that engine weighs 2,700 and some odd pounds, before I even hang the starter and generator on it, as you can see, it's moved back in the chassis some distance to get some weight transfer on the back anyway. That's one of the reasons I got those big coilovers in front. is because of the weight I got on that front axle. It's a 4,000 pound rated front axle. It won't break at 4,001 pounds, but I did have it completely apart, sandblasted to bare metal and wet Magnaflux in order to make sure there wasn't any cracks possibly starting in it anywhere. Now over here, we don't want to miss anything that I might have grabbed off something else. That driveline was made by Drivelines Northwest, and they were very proud of it. Cost me about $1,100 in order to get from a 1700 series yoke on the back of this transmission to a 1500 series yoke on the input to this rear axle. They wanted 1,100 and some bucks for that, and I paid it. I was able to get this gear shift stick off eBay for about 200 bucks. No, actually it was about 150. Fuller wants about 500 for them now. And pretty much everything. It's a 4-inch exhaust system. This exhaust manifold, which is people are very proud of, these rear outlet manifolds make these naturally aspirated or supercharged engines just absolutely sound beautiful. And this one came off of a Federally Marion truck, and I used to work at Federally Marion when they were around, and it was either number 545 or 546, and they had a big crack in it and they were going to throw it away. Well, this wonderful guy I had for a metal shop teacher back in the 1960s taught me how to weld cast iron, so I scarfed that thing up, brought it home, welded it up, and put it on this thing. The rest of it, as you can see, is this crane engine with a big supercharger on it, and it should be kicking out 320 horsepower for me. This postage stamp sized gas tank was kind of a sacrifice. I could not find a ready manufactured gas tank anywhere that would fit on this thing right. Everything I found at the wrecking yards was either 3 inches too long or too small, too big around, or some darn thing. But I think we've pretty much covered all this stuff, and the stuff you can't see, which is the steering gear up inside the cab over there. It's not in the cab right now, it's in pieces. But part of it came out of the same Kenworth that this air tank came out of. And some of it came out of a Peterbilt Model 310 garbage truck up in the scrapyard in Snohomish. And see if I left anything out here. I mean, this is pretty exciting. It's great fun. But I'm going to tie it off now. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm an old fucker on a fixed income, and if I get enough subscribers, YouTube will actually pay me a little bit for those dipshit commercials they make you watch. So bye for now. Next one we'll do on the cab, how the progress of that is going.